Kent, England, early June 1944. A German reconnaissance pilot, his Focke-Wulf 190 a fleeting shadow against the pale canvas of dawn, pushes his aircraft through the thin, pre-dawn clouds. The English Channel, a vast expanse of dark, corrugated iron, lies below. His mission is of existential importance to the Third Reich, to confirm the precise location and disposition of the gargantuan Allied invasion force that everyone in the German High Command knows is coming. For months, all signs, all logic, and all intelligence have pointed to a single, inevitable target, the Pas de Calais, the shortest, most direct crossing point from England to France, the gateway to the heart of Germany. What he is about to witness will not only confirm their deepest convictions, but will ignite a sense of terrifying urgency within the German war machine. Through his canopy, the impossible unfolds. An entire American army group is stirring to life in the English countryside. The scale of it is breathtaking, a spectacle of military might that almost defies belief. His hands, though gloved, feel slick with sweat as he scribbles frantic notes, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Below, endless columns of Sherman tanks are marshaled in staging areas, their long 75mm cannons pointing south towards France like a silent, waiting forest of steel. Squadrons upon squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts and B-17 Flying Fortresses sit wingtip to wingtip on newly constructed airfields, their metal skins catching the first glimmers of morning sun. The ports of Dover and Folkestone are not merely busy, they are suffocated by a vast armada of landing craft, packed so tightly against the docks and each other that they appear to form a solid, sprawling mass of steel and wood. He can almost smell the diesel fumes on the wind, almost feel the low, latent hum of 1,000,000 horsepower waiting to be unleashed, a coiled spring of destructive potential. With a final pass, he banks his plane, the image of this immense force burned into his memory, and heads for home. He carries with him what he believes to be the single most important piece of intelligence of the war. The blow is coming. It is coming soon. And it will fall, with the force of a Teutonic god's hammer, directly on Calais. But that pilot and the entire German High Command, from the most junior intelligence analyst to Adolf Hitler himself, with a designated audience for the most elaborate, audacious, and brilliantly executed magic trick in the history of modern warfare. They were staring with rapt and terrified attention to a ghost. The thousands of tanks that formed the backbone of this phantom army were meticulously crafted illusions of inflatable rubber, each weighing a mere 93 pounds, capable of being lifted by 4 men. The mighty Air Force that seemed to command the skies was a collection of cloth and wood decoys, convincing from 3,000 feet, but utterly hollow on the ground. The vast armada of landing craft, the hornet's nest of invasion vessels, were clever props, a mixture of real but non-essential craft and expertly designed fakes, all arranged to create a picture of imminent, overwhelming amphibious assault. The entire 1st U.S. Army Group, the largest single combat formation in the Allied order of battle, ostensibly under the command of the one American general the Germans feared above all others, George S. Patton, was a complete and utter fabrication. It was a phantom force, a theatrical production designed not to win a battle, but to win a war by preventing a battle from ever being fought on the enemy's terms. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a top-secret unit of just over 1,000 men who waged war not with bullets, bombs, or bayonets, but with the boundless power of human imagination. They were a bizarre and wonderful collection of artists, architects, sound engineers, set designers, and advertising men. Many of them recruited directly from the prestigious art schools and bustling ad agencies of New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. These were the men who would build a phantom army so detailed, so layered, and so profoundly believable that it would psychologically paralyze 15 entire German divisions, nearly 250,000 of the Reich's best soldiers, holding them in place to await an invasion that would never arrive. This is not a story about the awesome force of industrial arms, but the subtle and devastating power of art. It is the story of how canvas, rubber, and meticulously engineered sound became the invisible sledgehammer that would crack Hitler's vaunted Atlantic Wall and fundamentally alter the course of the Second World War. By the midpoint of the war, Europe had become a fortress. From the icy fjords of northern Norway down to the sun-baked border of Spain, Hitler had ordered the construction of the most formidable defensive line ever conceived, the Atlantic Wall. This was not a single wall, but a deep, complex, and lethal system of fortifications stretching for nearly 3,000 miles. It was a concrete nightmare of interlocking defenses, a gauntlet of reinforced artillery casements, thousands of machine gun pillboxes known as Tobruks, and vast coastal batteries with guns capable of hurling enormous shells miles out into the English Channel. The beaches themselves were seeded with millions of mines, Teufelminen, or devil's mines, and the vicious saw-toothed Regal Minen 43. The approaches were littered with anti-tank obstacles, fields of sharpened poles known as Rommel's spargel or Rommel's asparagus, designed to impale landing gliders, and extensive flooding of the lowlands to channel any attacking force into pre-sighted killing zones. This colossal project, a testament to the paranoid genius of the German military and the brutal efficiency of the Todt organization, was manned by some of the most disciplined and battle-hardened soldiers in the German army. For the Allied planners in London, gathered under the aegis of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the Atlantic Wall presented a terrifying and bloody problem. A conventional amphibious assault against such a deeply prepared defense would be a slaughter of historic proportions. The beaches would become killing fields. The channel would run red with the blood of an entire generation of young men. The success of the planned invasion, the monumental undertaking codenamed Operation Overlord, hinged on a single fragile element: surprise. But hiding an invasion force that would ultimately number nearly 3 million men, with their associated thousands of ships, tens of thousands of vehicles, and countless tons of supplies, was a physical impossibility. The sheer overwhelming scale of the buildup in southern England was too vast to conceal. It was a logistical Everest, and the entire island of Britain was being transformed into a massive armed camp. The Germans knew it. Their reconnaissance planes, though increasingly challenged by the RAF and USAF, still made daring, high-altitude flights over the coast. The Abwehr, the German military intelligence service under Admiral Canaris, had a network of spies and informants throughout Europe. They knew, with absolute certainty, that the invasion was coming. The only questions were the two that haunted the sleep of every German commander in the West: when, and more importantly, where.
The Germans' own impeccable logic, their rigid adherence to military doctrine, pointed overwhelmingly to one location, the Pas de Calais. It was the shortest sea crossing, a mere 20 miles, which would minimize the exposure of the invasion fleet to U-boats and the Luftwaffe. It offered the most direct, flat, and geographically advantageous route to the industrial heartland of Germany. Crucially, it was well within the operational range of the superior Allied fighter aircraft based in southeastern England, ensuring they could maintain air supremacy over the landing beaches. The German High Command and Hitler himself were utterly and unshakably convinced that this was the intended target. The Allied planners, operating under a top-secret committee known as the London Controlling Section, the masters of strategic deception, realized a profound and powerful truth of their craft. The most effective, most durable, and most powerful lie is the one your enemy already desperately wants to believe. They could not hide the evidence of a massive invasion, so they decided to manufacture a veritable mountain of false evidence, all of it pointing with unerring accuracy to the very place the Germans expected it. They needed to do more than simply feint or distract. They needed to create an entire, internally consistent, and utterly believable alternate reality. They needed to give the Germans an enemy to fixate on. They needed to build a ghost army. The idea was as radical as it was brilliant, an evolution of the highly successful deception operations run by the British in the North African Desert Campaign under the master illusionist Dudley Clark and his famous A-Force. The core concept was simple. If you cannot hide your real army, then you must build a fake one, and make that fake army so large, so loud, and so menacingly positioned that the enemy cannot afford to look away from it. This concept was championed within the American military by forward-thinking officers like Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, who envisioned a completely self-contained mobile deception unit capable of simulating entire divisions on its own. Activated on a cold January day in 1944 at Camp Forest, Tennessee, this strange new unit was given the deliberately, almost painfully mundane title of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The name was a piece of camouflage in itself, designed to be overlooked on any order of battle. But to the men who served in it, and in the secret history it would write across the battlefields of Europe, it would forever be known by its more fitting and evocative name, the Ghost Army. The recruitment process for this nascent unit was as unconventional as its intended mission. The Army's call was not for hardened infantrymen or skilled tankers, but for creative minds, for men whose primary weapon was their intellect and imagination. Recruiters were dispatched to the Pratt Institute in New York City, the Philadelphia College of Art, the Cleveland Institute of Art, and other top art and design schools across the nation. They scoured the ranks for artists, architects, advertising men, theatrical set designers, and sound engineers. They cherry-picked men who, in civilian life, were accustomed to creating illusions, to manipulating perception, and to selling ideas. Among their eclectic ranks were men who would later go on to achieve great fame in their chosen fields, including the future fashion icon Bill Bloss, the minimalist painter Ellsworth Kelly, the wildlife artist Arthur Singer, and the photographer Art Kane. These men, who possessed an average IQ reported among the highest in the entire U.S. Army at 119, were now tasked with practicing the art of war in the most literal and extraordinary sense. Their arsenal was a bizarre collection of theatrical props, retooled and scaled for industrial warfare. The unit was a composite, a carefully assembled machine of illusion with several distinct and specialized parts. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers, the largest component with nearly 400 men, was the visual heart of the operation. They were the sculptors and painters of this phantom force. They were equipped with hundreds of inflatable rubber decoys, tanks, cannons, jeeps, trucks, and even airplanes, which could be lifted by just 4 soldiers and were utterly indistinguishable from the real 40-ton machines of destruction. Then came the sonic deception arm, the 3132 Signal Service Company Special. These men were the orchestra of the Ghost Army. They traveled with a series of massive 500-pound speakers mounted on half-tracks, capable of blasting specially recorded sounds of troop movements, tank convoys, and nighttime bridge construction for a distance of up to 15 miles. They could make a lonely French valley sound like the assembly area for an entire armored division. Complementing them was the Signal Company Special, the masters of radio deception, or spoof radio as they called it. Their operators were not just sending fake messages, they were engaged in a form of electronic performance art. They could generate the entire radio traffic of a division headquarters, but more impressively, they could mimic the unique sending style, the rhythm, the cadence, the very personality of the telegrapher's hand, known as their fist, of individual Morse code operators from real military units. This was a feat of mimicry that German intelligence, who kept extensive records of Allied operators' fists, previously believed to be impossible. Finally, there was the 406th Engineer Combat Unit. This was the muscle of the outfit, a conventional engineering unit that provided security for this bizarre traveling roadshow. They were the shield for the artists at work, digging foxholes, manning machine guns, and creating a perimeter of real steel to protect the world of illusion being created within. Together, these disparate elements formed a cohesive and mobile unit of deception, capable of perfectly simulating the presence of 2 entire divisions, or a force of roughly 30,000 men.
The Ghost Army's grand and defining performance was a critical linchpin of Operation Fortitude, the overarching Allied deception plan designed to protect the fragile D-Day landings. The 23rd were the lead actors in Fortitude's South, the specific component of the plan designed to amplify the German obsession with the Pas de Calais. To make this threat not just credible but terrifyingly real, the Allies created an entirely fictitious army group, the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. To give FUSAG an immediate and undeniable air of legitimacy, they assigned its command to the one general the Germans respected and feared above all others, the flamboyant, aggressive, and brilliant General George Patton. Patton, who had been temporarily sidelined after a controversial incident in which he slapped a soldier, was the perfect choice. The Germans considered him the Allies' finest offensive commander and were absolutely convinced that he and he alone would be entrusted to lead the main invasion assault. Patton, for his part, embraced the theatrical role with gusto, making numerous highly conspicuous visits to the Kent countryside to inspect his phantom troops, ensuring his presence was noted by any potential German agents. This was the stage upon which the Ghost Army would deploy its full symphony of deception. Throughout the picturesque counties of southeastern England, centered around the strategic port of Dover, they began to physically manifest the existence of FUSAG. Under the cloak of darkness, the men of the 603rd Camouflage Engineers would roll into empty fields and, like strange nocturnal farmers, plant entire divisions of rubber. By morning, German reconnaissance flights would return to their bases in France with stunning photographs of sprawling motor pools, vast tank formations parked under camouflage netting, and fully equipped camps down to the smallest details, like fake laundry hanging on clotheslines, a touch of mundane authenticity designed to sell the bigger lie. They built dummy landing craft that cluttered the harbors and inflatable P-51 Mustangs that populated fake airfields. These dummy airfields were so convincing that on one occasion alone, a real Allied observation plane, lost in the fog, mistakenly tried to land on one of the canvas runways, only to be frantically waved off by the astonished artists below.
But the visual illusion, as convincing as it was only one layer of this multi-sensory deception. The true genius of the Ghost Army was its holistic approach to creating a false reality. The 3013th Second Sonic Unit would roll their heavily laden sound trucks into the quiet fields and forests of Kent. All night long, they would blast their curated library of sound effects across the landscape. These were not random noises, but carefully scripted sonic programs. A typical program might begin with the distant sound of arriving convoys, growing louder over several hours, followed by the clatter and clang of engineering units supposedly unloading equipment, and then in the pre-dawn hours, the unmistakable sound of tank columns moving up to their final assault positions. These recordings, made with painstaking attention to detail at Fort Knox, were meticulously engineered and played back through the powerful speakers to create a sonic tapestry of a massive army preparing for battle. The sound could travel for miles, a low, menacing rumble that echoed across the English Channel, a constant auditory drumbeat reinforcing the German conviction that Calais was the imminent target. Simultaneously, the skilled radio operators of the Signal Company Special were broadcasting a veritable storm of fake radio traffic from their mobile transmitters. They mimicked the entire electronic signature of a real Army Group headquarters, flooding the airwaves with everything from mundane supply requests for socks and ammunition to high-level coded operational discussions between division commanders. All of it carefully scripted to be intercepted and analyzed by the Germans. To add the final, crucial touch of realism, the unit employed what they called special effects or atmospherics. Soldiers from the 406th Engineers would don the shoulder patches of the fictional FUSAG divisions and drive trucks in endless loops to create the impression of heavy traffic. Other soldiers, impersonating military police, would be stationed at crossroads, conspicuously directing non-existent convoys. Men were sent into local pubs and towns with instructions to engage in careless talk, dropping hints about the massive force they were part of and the impending big show at Calais. all for the benefit of any potential German agents or sympathizers in the area. They were meticulously painting a picture for German intelligence, brushstroke by brushstroke, sound by sound, and signal by signal, constructing a reality that was more convincing than the truth. But the most critical question remained. Were the Germans, known for their thoroughness and intelligence prowess, truly watching this elaborate, multi-layered play? Was this grand deception actually working? The definitive answer came not from the front lines, but from the quiet code-breaking huts of Bletchley Park, the nerve center of Britain's top-secret Ultra program. The decryption of high-level German communications, including messages sent via their supposedly unbreakable Enigma machines, revealed that the German High Command was not just watching, they were mesmerized. They had taken the bait completely, swallowing it hook, line, and sinker. Every piece of manufactured evidence, the reconnaissance photos of rubber tanks, the radio intercepts of phantom units, the reports from their agents about Patton's presence, all fed into a powerful self-reinforcing loop of confirmation bias within the German command structure. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the cerebral and respected German supreme commander in the West, and the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, tasked with defending the French coast, were both adamant that the main Allied assault would come at the Pas de Calais. They became fixated on the threat posed by Fusag. As a result, they funneled their most powerful and mobile assets to that sector, including the formidable German 15th Army, a powerful force of 19 infantry and panzer divisions. These elite troops, representing a significant portion of Germany's total military strength in France, were now dug in, their formidable 88mm guns pointing across the Strait of Dover, waiting with grim determination for an army composed entirely of hot air and sound waves. The brilliant, unconventional work of just over 1,000 American artists and engineers was successfully pinning down and neutralizing nearly 250,000 of the Reich's finest soldiers. It was an unprecedented and astonishing feat of psychological warfare, and the stakes of this grand illusion were about to become infinitely higher. Then, in the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, the real show began. As 156,000 Allied soldiers, a mix of Americans, British, and Canadians, stormed the bloody beaches of Normandy, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, the men of the Ghost Army held their collective breath across the Channel in Kent. Their performance had reached its most critical make-or-break phase. Would the grand deception hold now that real blood was being spilled on French soil? As the first frantic reports of the Normandy landings reached Hitler's headquarters at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, his generals were thrown into a state of profound confusion. The landings were certainly significant, a major assault, but they were taking place in Normandy, hundreds of miles from the Pas de Calais, where the truly massive 1st U.S. Army Group, under the dreaded Patton, was still poised and waiting. The German High Command, their strategic vision completely clouded by the brilliance of Operation Fortitude, quickly concluded that Normandy must be a diversion. It was a large and costly feint to be sure, but a feint nonetheless, designed with the sole purpose of drawing their precious panzer reserves away from the real target at Calais. Adolf Hitler himself, a notorious believer in his own intuition, personally intervened, forbidding the 15th Army to be moved from its positions. He ordered them to hold fast, to wait for the real invasion, the one he knew was coming.
For 7 long and crucial weeks after D-Day, as the fate of the Allied invasion hung precariously in the balance on the narrow and fiercely contested Normandy beachhead, the Ghost Army continued its elaborate and vital charade. They moved their inflatable tank formations to new positions to suggest that Fusag was redeploying for its own push. Their radio operators broadcasted a new series of messages, carefully scripted to indicate that the diversion in Normandy was working even better than planned, and that the main, decisive attack on Calais was imminent.
Every single day that the 15th Army remained frozen in place, a potent force, paralyzed by a phantom, was another day that Allied troops, tanks, and supplies could pour into the vulnerable Normandy lodgment. The 1,100 men of the Ghost Army were holding a strategic door wide open with a magnificent lie, and through that door poured the unstoppable forces that would ultimately lead to the liberation of an entire continent. Their work, conducted in the quiet fields of England, was saving thousands of lives on the bloody beaches of France. 2 weeks after the initial landings, having played their part in England to perfection, the Ghost Army packed up its traveling roadshow of deception and crossed the English Channel into France. Their war was far from over. In fact, their most dangerous and audacious work was just beginning. They would go on to conduct more than 20 distinct deception missions on the European continent, moving like a phantom circus up and down the front lines, impersonating real, hard-fighting American outfits to confuse the enemy and save the lives of their comrades. Their missions became a litany of breathtaking audacity and creative flair. During the brutal, grinding siege of the port city of Brest, they simulated a much larger attacking force to the south of the city, successfully drawing off German defenders and resources from the main American assault. In September of 1944, during the fierce and bloody fighting for control of the heavily fortified city of Metz, a dangerous gap suddenly opened in General Patton's very real Third Army line. A full division had been secretly moved to another sector, leaving a 7-mile front dangerously undefended. Patton, the man they had so convincingly impersonated, now called upon the real Ghost Army to perform a desperate miracle. He tasked them with holding this vulnerable position until actual reinforcements could be brought up. For 7 long and incredibly tense days, the 1,100 men of the 23rd, with their handful of real machine guns and a vast arsenal of illusions, impersonated an entire armored division. They drove their few real tanks in endless loops, creating tracks in the mud to suggest heavy traffic. They blasted their sonic recordings of tank movements all night. They created the radio traffic of a full division headquarters. They were dangerously exposed, a thin line of artists and engineers with no real firepower to back up their colossal bluff. But the Germans, hearing the constant sounds of armor and seeing from a distance the faint outlines of a powerful force, never dared to attack. The Ghost had held the line. The ultimate full-circle moment, the final undeniable confirmation of their monumental success, came after the war had ended. High-ranking captured German generals were systematically interrogated by Allied intelligence officers, among them the highly respected and professional Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. When the interrogators asked him the crucial question, why he had not immediately unleashed the powerful panzer divisions of the 15th Army to drive the Normandy landings back into the sea when they were at their most vulnerable, his answer was a stunning and complete vindication of the deceivers. He and his staff, he admitted with a mixture of professional chagrin and grudging respect, were completely and utterly convinced that Normandy was a secondary attack. The evidence pointing to a main invasion at the Pas de Calais, led by the fearsome Patton, was simply too overwhelming, too detailed, too consistent, and too logical to ignore. The Ghost Army had not just fooled a few reconnaissance pilots or low-level analysts, it had thoroughly and decisively deceived the highest and most professional levels of the entire German war machine. The Ghost Army's final and perhaps most spectacular performance of the war came in March of 1945 in a complex and daring mission codenamed Operation Viersen. The U.S. Ninth Army was preparing to cross the formidable Rhine River, the last major natural barrier standing between the Allies and the heartland of Germany. A direct, contested assault across the river was expected to be incredibly costly, a bloodbath. The 23rd was tasked with a monumental deception. To impersonate 2 entire infantry divisions, the 30th and the 79th, a combined force of over 40,000 men, and to feign a river crossing at a point 10 miles south of the actual target, near the German city of Viersen. They deployed every trick in their well-worn book, and then they invented new ones for the occasion. They inflated over 600 dummy vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks, and positioned them in realistic assembly areas. Their sonic trucks, operating around the clock, blasted the sounds of pontoon bridge construction during the day and the incessant rumble of arriving armored convoys at night. To sell the illusion completely, they had real combat engineering units attached to them, who began constructing actual bridge sections and launching real boats into the river. Phony headquarters were established in captured buildings, complete with staff cars parked outside and men dressed as colonels and generals bustling in and out. They even used flash canisters to perfectly simulate the muzzle flashes of an artillery bombardment, deliberately and successfully drawing heavy German counter-battery fire onto their empty, inflatable positions. The ruse worked for perfection. German intelligence, completely duped, reported a massive American buildup opposite the Ghost Army's position. The German commanders shifted their precious reserves and concentrated their artillery on the Phantom divisions. Then, on the night of March 24th, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine River against astonishingly light resistance, suffering a tiny fraction of the casualties they had anticipated. The crossing was a stunning success. General William Simpson, the Ninth Army commander, sent a personal commendation to the 23rd, praising them for their careful planning, minute attention to detail, and diligent execution, which resulted in a complete success of the operation. The Ghost had held the door open one last time. When the war in Europe finally came to an end, the men of the Ghost Army were debriefed, congratulated in secret, and then sworn to absolute secrecy. Their incredible, almost unbelievable story was classified as top secret, their unit records locked away in government vaults. For more than 50 years, their unique and vital contributions to the Allied victory remained one of the last great untold stories of the Second World War, until their mission was finally and officially declassified in 1996. The veterans, bound by their oath, had gone on with their lives. They had melted back into the civilian world from which they had been so strangely plucked. Bill Blass returned to New York and built a global fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly moved to Paris and became one of the most celebrated artists of the 20th century. They returned to their creative professions, their wartime exploits a hidden, silent chapter in their remarkable lives.
But the legacy of their ingenuity did not remain hidden. The groundbreaking tactics they had pioneered on the battlefields of France and Germany, the seamless and sophisticated integration of visual, sonic, and electronic deception became foundational principles of modern information warfare and military psychological operations. The inflatable rubber tank has been replaced by the sophisticated digital decoy and the advanced electronic countermeasure. The spoofed radio message has evolved into complex and far-reaching cyber warfare operations designed to disrupt and deceive an enemy's command and control network. The core concept, however, the very soul of their craft, remains utterly unchanged. To control the narrative of the battlefield, to manipulate human perception, and to make the enemy fight against shadows of your own creation. The Ghost Army proved, beyond any doubt, that in the crucible of total war, human creativity could be as decisive and as powerful as industrial firepower. They demonstrated that a small, dedicated unit of artists and engineers, wielding their imagination as their primary weapon, could achieve strategic results wildly disproportionate to their size, saving thousands upon thousands of lives in the process. Their battlefield was the enemy's mind, and on that complex and challenging field, they were undefeated. In February of 2022, their unique, distinguished, and long secret service was finally recognized at the highest level when the members of the Ghost Army were collectively awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. War is too often remembered as a simple, brutal contest of brute force, a grim and terrible mathematics of destruction measured in divisions, bomb tonnage, and casualty lists. But beneath that visceral and violent narrative, there lies another, more subtle and more fascinating story. It is a story of intellect, of audacity, of creativity, and of art. The soldiers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were the quiet maestros of this hidden war. They were the combat con artists who painted grand illusions on the bloody canvas of the European battlefield, who composed symphonies of deception that echoed through the minds of enemy commanders.
and who directed a theatrical performance so profound and so convincing that it helped bring a hateful empire to its knees. They were not ghosts in the spectral sense, but for half a century they were invisible, their true purpose and their remarkable achievements hidden from the world they had helped to save. Their legacy is a powerful and enduring reminder that the most profound victories in human conflict are not always won with the loudest bang, but sometimes with the most convincing and clever whisper.